Hi, it's Claire and welcome to Needle Say More. Today I'm going to show you how to create short gathered sleeves from existing long sleeves. If the sleeves are too small, as on this, the sleeves are too small, so we're going to take them out and then use this fabric to make a short sleeve that mirrors the embroidery panel here. So we're going to use the same edging, this kind of scalloped edge. We're going to take the sleeve out, make the armhole a little bit, which will make the armhole a little bit bigger, and then we're going to use this bit of the sleeve to create like a ruffle sleeve. So to start off with, you want to neatly cut the sleeve out. So if you just pinch the fabric slightly like that, then you should be able to cut along the sleeve. So this is the sleeve here, so we're just cutting out the original sleeve and then we'll sew in a new ruffle to this. It won't be a raw edge like this, it will be finished. You want this as close to the seam line as possible. So I'm cutting really carefully just to the right of where the sleeve was stitched in. And you really want to take your time with this, because if you cut into it too much, that's the whole thing gone. Okay, I think I'm nearly back to the start. Yeah, I'm just doing the last little bit under the underarm now. Okay, there we go. So this is the sleeve. I can cut this up to make a new sleeve panel. And then that's the top. So it already looks better. So I'm just going to repeat this process on the other side. The sleeves have both now been cut out to make a sleeveless top. Now we can focus on using the sleeves to make the new sleeve. The next step is to cut along the seam under the arm to open this fabric out, so you can see how much we've got to work with. You could do with an iron because it is quite crinkly cotton, but this is the piece I've got to work with, and I've got one of these for each side for each sleeve. I've measured all the way around the armhole and it is 63 centimetres. That's not including if I want a seam allowance under the sleeve. So then if I measure the length of the sleeve, I go from the sleeve head here all the way down, I can see that I haven't quite got 63 centimetres along the sleeve. So the best thing to do would be to cut this so that I can attach two pieces together, and I'll do a slightly narrower seam. I've given the sleeve a quick iron. It's not completely crease free, but it'll be much easier to work with now that it's kind of been flattened out. The frill here on the top is at its longest 9 centimetres. So it'd be really good if out of here I could get 2 9 centimetre strips, so that will mirror what is already on the existing top and give me a new sleeve. So I'm going to cut the cuff off just to open this out along the bottom, like that. It's got the placket here, so we'll need to avoid that bit. So from the placket to the edge is 22 centimetres. So as long as I avoid that bit, I should be fine. And the bit that I want here is kind of the longest bit on the sleeve anyway. So if I start at the placket and then cut up, so that's the bit with the placket on. So that kind of gives me this bit as a bit of a clean slate to work with. Then I'm going to use the friction pen, and from this cut edge that I just did, I'm going to make lines every 9 centimetres. So the new piece will mirror what is already there. I'm going to have to stretch it out on this cuff a little bit. So that's going to be the end of my first panel, and then if I join these lines together, it should give me a straight cutting line. This is going to be gathered before we insert it in, so we have got a tiny bit of wiggle room. If it's not completely perfect, I don't think it'll be as visible as if we're doing a completely straight line. This is a really fine cotton, so it's not the easiest to mark out. So I'll use this to cut this line to cut out my first panel. And then cut across here. There we go. Just going to give it a good press here so I can check that it's straight, and I'm going to give that end bit, now I've cut off the placket and the cuff, a really good press so I can just make it a bit more easier. So this is my first panel. Now that I've given the end a press, it doesn't look quite as wobbly as it did. It's not 100% perfect, but once it's gathered and overlocked and inserted in the top, it'll look really good. So you can either use this piece as a template, oh, it does look a little bit wobbly there actually, by placing it on top like this, or you can remark out. I don't think I'm going to quite squeeze it in there, it's not quite long enough, but I'm going to use this as my template to cut along. I might try and neaten that bit up a bit now that it's not as creased. I try not to be as much of a perfectionist, but I do really struggle with it. Yeah, that's better. So if I just shave out a little bit on the end, and let's just neaten up this edge as well. While we're at it. There we go, that looks much better. So if I use this as my template, I can cut around it. the first sleeve done, and I need to repeat this again on the second sleeve. I'm going to use my overlocker to attach these two pieces together to make one long strip. I did try and do it on my sewing machine, but it's quite fine and it kept gathering, so I think the overlocker will give a nicer finish. Yeah, that looks much better. I was going to overlock the edge after I'd sewn it anyway, just because the bottom of this will be seen because it's the bottom of the sleeve. I do think that looks much better. I'm going to set my overlocker to a rolled hem, and I'm going to do a rolled hem along the edge just to give a really neat finish. So the edge of the original top has been scalloped, but I think a rolled edge will kind of mirror this really nicely. To set up a rolled hem on your overlocker, I normally work from top to bottom or bottom to top, so I can do it all really methodically. So if you go to the stitch length on mine, you change this to R for rolled hem. I normally keep the differential feed about 1, but you'll know which is best for your machine. Here, the standard and there's rolled hem, RH. So I put that over to rolled hem. Then here it says S for standard, R for rolled hem. And there's a little red button to move across. But to do this, you need to disengage the blade, which is here. So to disengage my blade, push it in and put it down, and then it will just let me push it across. So it won't let me do anything. It won't let me do it back. Oh, there we go. So if I don't push this in, it won't let me move it at all. So that was to disengage the blade, and this is to move this forward and back. So that is here, 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 the blade down and there. And then the last bit I need to do, lift the flywheel up, I need to take out the left needle to give me a really neat, narrow rolled hem. So there's a little screw just at the top of the needle here. You need to use a really fine screwdriver like this, and then you're just going to unscrew at the top of the needle, and they are labelled L and R, so you know which is left and right. And then this screw I would not take out, I'd just tighten it back up again, because if you lose that screw, it's very, very tiny and your overlocker won't work without it. So it's really important that you keep hold of bits like that. So now the needle's out, I'm just going to cut the thread, and I'm going to put my overlocker needle somewhere safe, because I'll put that back in when I finish doing the rolled hem. And then I normally just leave the cone on there, but then as you start sewing, the bit that was in the needle will just come out on the chain. So let's give it a go and see how it is looking. I was just about to do it on my main fabric, but I already know that's going to be a bad idea. So I'm just going to test it on a scrap to check that the rolled hem function is working correctly. Always do this on a scrap. I almost went to do it for real on my fabric then. Always do it on a scrap to test. So there we go. You've got a really neat, really cute, fine edge, and you can use this on scarves. You could use it on, sometimes you use it on the bottom of dresses and skirts. It's a really neat, really fine overlocked edge, and that's called a rolled hem. Now that that's all set up, I'm going to do the rolled hem along this edge. Now there isn't really a right and a wrong side, so I'm just going to do the rolled hem down one of the edges. So I'm going to line it up with the line where it won't cut anything off, because I've disengaged the blade. So it had a little wobble on there, but I think I'll notice, but I don't think anyone else probably would notice that. So there we are, I've done a rolled hem all the way down the edge. And bar when it got stuck on the seam, I've got a little bump there. I think it looks quite neat, and it'll finish off our top really nicely. And even though it's different from the scalloped edge, it's kind of in fitting. So I've just done the other sleeve, and because I knew my machine wasn't going to like this little bump here with the rolled hem, I managed to catch it just in time, so it is hardly noticeable. So I've got one really good one and one not so good one, but again, I don't think anyone will notice. I deliberately made these sleeves too long because I wanted them to be gathered. So to gather them, I'm going to set my machine to stitch length 5, which is the longest stitch length, and I'm just going to do a gather stitch all the way down the edge of the fabric. And at the end, don't use the scissor button. You want to leave 2 long tails so you can gather it. You can see the machine, because it's such a fine fabric, has actually already started gathering it for me, and it does look really nice. Now I've got 2 lengths of fabric that's been gathered, ready to put the sleeves in. So I'm going to go to the armhole. I'm going to make sure the fabric's right side's facing. So where the seam is, that's my right side. And I'm going to line that up with the shoulder seam. Just going to cut off the overlocking so it's not in the way. So I'm going to use a pin to line up the 2 seams, so I know that that is halfway, and then with the ends I'm going to put it so it's just overlapping by about a centimetre and a half over the seam at the bottom, so that when it's gathered, I've gone all the way around, I can seam it together at the bottom. So I can see I've got quite a lot of gathering to do to get it to fit the armhole, which is what I wanted. I wanted quite a gathered sleeve and it to be quite loose fitting. There's no point in taking out 2 tight sleeve and then putting in another tight sleeve. We want something quite loose. So then I'm gonna pull my gathering stitches to gather it in. Now that I'm at this point, I'm regretting doing 1 line of gathering stitches. I wish I'd done 2 or 3, but I think I'll probably be able to work with what I've got here. But if I was going to do it again, I'd probably do 2 lines of gather stitches, just because it gives them much more even gather. There's less chance of the thread snapping as you go round. I can already feel that this thread isn't happy. It's getting a bit annoyed. Hopefully it's not going to snap on me. You've got 2 or 3 lines together and you can get a more even finish. Okay, that's looking about right. So I should be able to put the raw edges together now and pin this in. Okay, so it's pinned around that side, so I need to gather it on this side and pin it in here as well. There it is, it's pinned all the way around. So on my machine, I'm going to sew the seam at the bottom and then I can sew it in one big circle. so otherwise it's going to be really tricky to make sure it meets perfectly at the bottom. So first step, to sew it together at the bottom, I'm going to start from the rolled hem edge because I want it to line up perfectly. Okay, so that's all done. Just put the pins back in. So I'm going to remove the arm and then I can sew it round in a big circle. I'm going to take the pins out as I go. So I've now gone all the way around, so I'm just going to pull this back and check that I haven't got any tucks in the main fabric. If you've got any, I wouldn't say they're loose threads, I'd say they're bits of yarn where it's frayed a little bit. I'm going to cut out the sleeve. There we go, and then these are just my gather stitches poking out through the bottom. So if I compare both sides, yeah, that looks much better. So I think this mini kind of frill sleeve that we've added in nicely mirrors what's going on there, and that's a much bigger, wider armhole, so I think it's going to be much more comfortable to wear than it was. So the sleeve's in, it looks great. Obviously it could do with a little bit of a press. Just to finish, I'm just going to overlock this raw edge just to get it looking really professional, and I'm just going to overlock this bit. So that's the underarm seam. Now I'm going to go round and do the armhole. Actually, I'm going to do it from the top where there's the majority of the fabric so I don't get any tucks. The edge is now overlocked and it looks so smart. It's just giving it a real refresh. It's going to be so much nicer to wear summer on warmer days. Just need to overlock this one and it's all finished.